Is that okay? All right, so my name is David Lenderman. I am going to cover the still photography lighting segment today. And Craig Beasley is here. He's going to do the video once I get done rambling. So if you have questions, please ask. We don't have a lot of time, but so if your question is going to be covered later in the talk, I will just mention that. But if it's not, I'll do my best to answer it. So understanding exposure and lighting. Lighting, you know, is important to all photography, obviously. It is especially important in underwater photography because, as you know, as divers, as you descend, we lose color, right? At depth, everything becomes blue. So it's really important to have lights, strobes, or video type lights to bring that color back. And also it's dark down there, right? When you get down to 80, 100 feet, you lose a lot of light. So you really need something to bring that light back. Artificial lighting allows faster shutter speeds and lower ISO settings. And artificial lighting can also help your subject stand out from its background. Our lighting should highlight our subject's color, shapes, texture.
We lost your audio.
Minimize distracting elements, and also can be utilized to create a mood. So examples of creating a mood, you know, this is a happy anemone fish on a coral reef. It's all brightly, evenly lit, but the same species, much more mysterious, dark looking image, right? Just with a change in lighting. Again, kind of similar, you know, we got two images here of a nice brightly lit coral reef, the diver in one, the same fan coral in another photo though, to the image due to different lighting. Same here, we got the happy coral reef, a little more mysterious coral reef, same fan coral in the foreground of all three of those images. Here we have flamboyant cuttlefish on the mucky bottom, just lit with regular strobes, nice and evenly, a little more mysterious and dark with the snoot lighting on it. So you can really change things a lot by controlling your lighting. These two blendings are taken on the same day, same oil rig, but different settings and different angles aiming in the background to utilize blue or black backgrounds. Again, creating different looks by controlling our light. So photography is said to reveal and conceal. We want to control our lighting so that we choose what is concealed and what is revealed to make a better image. So our goal today is to teach you how to control the natural and artificial light in your images. So the plan, we're going to have a brief discussion of lighting gear, very brief explanation of the exposure puzzle, and discussion of how to apply exposure techniques to improve your images. And we'll talk about strobe positioning and also shooting with snoots. So artificial lighting options, basically you have for underwater strobes or continuous lights, often referred to as video lights. You know, this is real basic. I'm going to go real fast on this. Basically strobes, you know, come from all different shapes and sizes. The cheapest ones you get about 300 bucks. The most expensive ones I've seen are about 2,500 bucks. So really it's a wide range. And you can sync your strobes with the optical sync cord or electrical sync cord. This is a variety, some of the strobes. One of note on here, the one on the bottom right is a brand new flash from Backscatter. It's a hybrid flash. That's a 5,000 lumen video light and a flash, all in one package. So if you like to do video and still images, it's very interesting. It just came out. So it's looks like a very promising new toy. So optical versus electrical sync. You know, strobes can be fired either method. Each have their own advantages and disadvantages. Who in here uses fiber optic sinks? Raise your hand. Does anybody use electric sinks? You do? Only one person, Martin. Okay. So the benefit of the fiber optics is that you can add or remove them easily. You can pull them out underwater. You don't have to worry about making them watertight because there's no O-ring involved. So the disadvantages are you're using your actual strobe on your camera. And so you tend to eat up the battery on your camera faster, possibly generate more heat in the housing, and possibly have slower recycle times due to utilizing that camera flash.
My camera doesn't have a flash.
Yeah, that's also, I was going to say, you also, if you don't have a flash, it may require a flash trigger or a TTL converter also, in addition to a flash trigger. So electrical sync uses a O-ring seal, watertight connection. Back in the day, before the fiber optics and the digital cameras, everyone had electrical sync cords. I don't miss them, honestly, but the camera's fast is not firing, so your camera battery will typically last longer, and the recycle time is only limited by your external strobe and not the camera flash. If you're using TTL flash control, electrical sync is typically the most reliable, accurate method. And Martin, I'm guessing you're using TTL on your acolyte housing? Yeah, and it works well? Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yes. Continuous lights. These are what, like people call video lights. They're primarily used for video or focus lights. And again, they have a wide range from very small and expensive ones to really big, powerful ones. I said well over 2,500, you can get them up to like $5,000 for huge, ginormous ones. They'll light up the whole city. Some are available with a remote control, which is a very nice feature. So you can remount the remote control right on the handles of your housing, and you can adjust the power settings and on and off of your lights with that instead of having to reach up and turn it off on the actual light itself. And this is some examples. I know there's discussion sometimes and questions about continuous lights for photos. If you're shooting stills, you can read this. I'm not going to read it all off to you. But to me, the biggest disadvantage of using a continuous light for still photos is that so many of the creatures seem to be afraid of those bright lights. And so when I go in, and even like shooting video, they tend to turn around or move. So for me, I'm sticking with strobes for that reason alone. So we're going to talk about shooting your camera in manual. If your camera doesn't have manual, maybe we'll substitute aperture mode for that. The little graphic shows everyone's a photographer until you shoot a manual. So today we're going to try to make everybody a photographer and help understand some of these concepts about shooting a manual. The big benefit of shooting a manual is that you're taking out a lot of the variability. So if you make one adjustment, the camera's not trying to compensate in another direction. So you're controlling exactly what's going on. And also I suggest if you have the ability to shoot in RAW with your camera, you should be shooting in RAW. It's a format versus JPEG. So RAW is the format that captures all the data that's captured by your sensor, okay? So you have all that data to work with later in editing, which gives you a lot more flexibility to make adjustments and still have that image look good. And also it's easy to set the white balance after the shot by shooting in RAW. So reasons not to shoot RAW, it does require post-processing or editing. It will create larger files on your memory card and on your hard drive. It may slow down your camera, so you can shoot a real quick burst of 10 photos, maybe in JPEG without a problem, but if you're trying to shoot a real big burst of RAW files, it may have some lag with your camera. You consider your image is good enough. You don't need the extra ability to improve your images. And you're just lazy. And I'm not gonna lie, I was lazy for a long time. After I started shooting digital, I shot RAW for a little while, but I hated Lightroom. And so I shot JPEG for a number of years. And then, not that I hated Lightroom, I hated Photoshop. But then I shot JPEG for a few years. But then when Lightroom came out, I haven't looked back. I've been shooting all RAW since Lightroom.
You don't shoot both RAW and JPEG?
Only if my wife's on a trip with me and she wants JPEGs for social media posting. Because I don't do any of that stuff till I get home. But the JPEGs I can give her while we're on a trip. But yeah, I don't usually shoot both. I just shoot RAW only. And Lightroom makes it really easy for me to go through and work on those. So exposure. Basically, exposure is total amount of light allowed to fall on the photographic medium, be it film or a digital sensor, during the process of taking a photo. I grew up in the film days, shooting underwater slide film. So to me, underwater exposure today with digital age is super easy, okay? The instant feedback on the LCD and availability of the histogram makes it really simple to see where you're at. You can shoot, review your image in the histogram and make adjustments and shoot again. How easy can life be? But for this really to work, you got to understand the relationship between your f-stop, the shutter speed, the ISO setting, the strobe output, and the strobe subject distance. And of course, editing on the computer will also help improve your images to help get them looking their best. So basically, there's no reason to have a poorly exposed image these days. Okay. So parts of the exposure puzzle include f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, strobe output, and strobe to subject distance. And we're going to talk briefly about what each of these do. Okay, I call it an exposure puzzle because if you put the pieces together correctly, you have a work of art. If you don't put them together correctly, you just have a pile of garbage, okay? So it's really important to understand what all these pieces do and what you need to do with them for your image. So f-stops. I'm gonna hit this real quickly because I think most of y'all all know what these are, but we're gonna have to get to the part where we're talking about balancing blue water backgrounds on strobe illuminated photos. So we have to build up to that spot. So f-stops are the size of the opening or the aperture in the lens that light travels through to reach your sensor, okay? It's an inverse relationship, so the small numbers equal a larger opening. The larger numbers equal smaller opening, okay? Just to make it more confusing. So this is a little graphic to show what we're talking about. So, Mr. Potato Head, so when you adjust your f-stop, it impacts both yours. Okay, all these images that we're showing Mr. Potato Head, everything is kept constant except the one variable that we're discussing on that page, okay? So on these shots, the strobe, the shutter speed, the ISO are all kept constant. Only the f-stop is being changed. And so you'll see that the f-stop manipulation changes both the background and the strobe illuminated portion of the image, okay? It impacts both, okay? And you can't really talk about f-stops without talking about depth of field. Small apertures, the high numbers will have greater depth of field, and the big apertures, which are the small numbers, offer the least depth of field. So here's a couple examples. So at f4, you got Mr. Potato Head in focus, but the background is blurry, okay? And change to f16, Mr. Potato Head is still in focus, but now the background has become much more visible, clear, okay? This is especially important when shooting macro. At the wide open apertures on the left, f4, for example, you maybe have a 1/4 inch of really good depth of field. And then on the right side of f16, you probably have, 1/2 inch or something, a really solid, clear depth of field. So it makes a big difference what aperture you're shooting. So now we're moving on to shutter speed. The amount of time the sensor is open to allow light in. Or excuse me, the shutter is open to allow light into the sensor. Slower shutter speeds allow more light in, but it can cause image blur due to motion of the camera or of the subject. Faster shutter speeds will freeze the action, but let in less light. For underwater, I'm typically shooting somewhere 1/60th to 200 a second. The faster side usually for strobe illuminated photos, and the slower side for when I'm trying to get blue water backgrounds. So shutter speeds, if you have a photo that's illuminated only by a strobe, an extreme example would be a night dive, or a lot of your macro shots are only illuminated by a strobe. Messing with your shutter speed is not really going to change that long as you stay within the sync limits of your camera, okay? What the best tool of shutter speed is using it to control the ambient light visible in your image, okay? So here again, everything constant, only changing the shutter speed. You will see that Mr. Potato Head, that's strobe illuminated, has not changed at all, okay? His exposure has not changed. What's changed is the background, okay? That ambient light, okay? That is controlled by your shutter speed. And so on the left, I'm shooting at a slower shutter speed because I'm aiming horizontally a little deeper, darker water, so I can get that blue water. In the right image, shooting at a higher shutter speed, I'm aiming up toward the surface to the bright sky, okay? And those are the reasons for that. But we're going to talk more about this because today the major goal is getting you to understand how to get blue water backgrounds in your images, okay? So ISO, it's this camera sensitivity to light. Back in the days, you had to choose your film ISO. Nowadays, you just turn a knob on your camera, which is very nice. Higher ISO settings will require less light to create an acceptable image, but will introduce more digital noise to the image. In most cases, underwater, I'm shooting up maybe 100 to 400, unless there's some reason to go higher. So again, keeping everything else constant, changing the ISO setting, and you can see it impacts both the foreground strobe illuminated portion and the background ambient light portion of the image. So for underwater, normally I'm utilizing the ISO if I'm trying to expose natural light portions of the image, okay? So if you're on a deep dark wreck and you want to have a decent shutter speed that you can hold the camera still properly, and you also want to have a a relatively mid-range or smaller aperture so that you can get decent depth of field. Bumping that ISO a little bit higher than normal will help you achieve that. Some cameras handle high ISO noise better than others. My newest digital mirrorless cameras, I can shoot it at like ISO 8000 and clean up a little bit in the denoise in Lightroom, and they look great. But different cameras have different abilities, so it's important that you understand your camera's ability with a high ISO settings and how much noise it generates. So check that out before you go trying to make some masterpieces. Basically, all these. Go ahead.
Did you mean 8,000 or 800?
No, 8,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I have two different mirrorless cameras, and one I shoot it up to 5,000, one at 8. Not for underwater. On wildlife photography in the morning or evening. It's pretty fun. But like my older DSLRs, if I went above 400, I could start seeing noise. So it all depends on your camera, and it's important, like I said, that you know your limits of your camera. So everything's a trade-off, high ISO, yes, it gives you a brighter image, the ability to capture in lower light, but it has noise. Large apertures let in more light, but you get less depth of field. High shutter speed frees your action, but you need more light to be able to use that high shutter speed. So everything's a balancing act. And it's really important that you determine what your priorities are. Do you have an image that you need more depth of field because there's foreground and distant objects that need to both be in focus? Do you need to freeze fast action and causing you to need a higher shutter speed? Or do you need to create an image in really low light where you may have to crank up your ISO? It's important that you understand these things and how to address all these situations. So I know what you're thinking probably is, David, can we have one slide to explain all these things? So this slide kind of shows you going from a dark exposure on the left to a bright exposure on the right. It shows us all the different settings and what's happening with them, including your depth of field, your shutter speed causing the blurred image, and then your ISO as you go to the right causing noise. So that kind of gives you an idea of what all these things do. And if you don't understand this, you should 100% without doubt understand this without any question. Okay, it's very important as a photographer. Manual versus program mode, okay? How many of y'all shoot in manual? Not talking about your strobe, your exposure, your camera settings. Okay, how many of y'all shoot like a program or auto mode? Okay. So, like on Lane, if I'm doing something, I'm taking pictures of a party or something with my camera, I would maybe use program mode because things are changing a lot, and it's not real critical that everything's dead nuts right. And program mode, auto modes will work really well for a lot of average situations. Underwater does not qualify as average situation typically. Okay, and the camera does not know your priorities, only you do. Okay, whether you want fast shutter speed, whether you want depth of field, or what have you. And so by taking control of the camera and shooting in manual, you're really, doing the best for what you're trying to achieve. Okay. And even if you're shooting a camera in manual, most cameras will still let you shoot your strobe and TTL control if you want to do so. Okay. So the question is, what is a good exposure? Well, this will vary from image to image. It really, a proper exposure is something that allows you to maximize the quality of the image, to make the best image you can get. Your camera display and histogram will help determine this. One issue when I started taking pictures underwater with a digital camera, the first trip or maybe two, I was always underexposing everything because I would take a photo at 80 feet and my camera display, it looked like just nice and bright, looks really good. But then when I get on the computer, everything looked dark. And then it took me a while to snap that the monitors on your camera, the display you're looking at is calibrated for showing things on land in brighter light. So when you're down there in darker ambient light, that screen looks really bright and your image looks really bright and vivid, but it's a little underexposed still. So keep that in mind, okay? On my first digital cameras, I would set the brightness of my camera display higher than the normal setting, okay? I don't do that anymore because I understand it now. But the histogram will also help a lot here in this situation because it doesn't matter if it looks bright or if it looks dark. The histogram is telling you some facts there. And also another thing to set on your camera is the highlights warning, also called the blinkies. one like the highlights, the parts that are burned out or overexposed will blink on the back display. That's also very helpful. Okay, and I'll talk about this in a sec. So a histogram basically, not all, but most of your cameras will allow you to turn the histogram on the back display. So maybe you'll have your main picture of the fish you just took on the display, and then you'll have a little histogram, or maybe the histogram will be superimposed in the bottom corner of that picture of the fish or what have you. But by turning the histogram on, it's very valuable to have that information on your display. Histogram, basically the bar chart that indicates what brightness levels are present in the image and how much of each shade is within the image, okay? So you got the dark areas to the left, the bright areas to the right. And this is going to look different for different photos, okay? Not all images are going to have a quote unquote normal histogram, which is kind of more clumped into the center. A white subject on a white background, like a white flounder on white sand, is going to be more shifted to the right, okay? Dark eel with a black background is going to be more shifted to the left. And you can see how it's piling up on the left side there. That's because a lot of that area in that image is solid black. There's no data there, okay? And if you're doing this intentionally, that's fine. If you're trying to take a picture of a queen angelfish swimming in blue water and you want it properly exposed and you're getting a thing going off the left side, that's bad, right? So it depends on what your image is, what your histogram is going to look like. But the key is that typically you don't want to go way off the left edge or way off the right edge, okay? So, the good thing about histogram, it gives a visual indication, like if the highlights are overexposed. So if it's going off the right side, like here, we have a little spike on the far right side. When it's hitting the edge, that tells you there's no data in some of those pixels, okay? And that spike on the right side here is corresponding to the bright clouds up here in the top left corner, okay? There's some of these spots there's just like no data, okay? It's just white. And if it's a teeny bit and it's something that's really supposed to be bright white, it's not a big deal. But if this is a lot of your image that's showing up like that, that's a problem. So here's a picture of my son. He's 22 now, so this is a long time ago, obviously. And you can see the clipping on the clouds here. Okay, those are blown out. You can tell it's ugly, doesn't look good. And that's corresponding to this right here, where it's going off that right edge, okay? There's no data there. You can't edit that out. If you try to bring the exposure down there, it's nothing. It's just white, okay? The big problem with overexposed areas like this is that when you first see an image, you tend to move your eye to the brightest spot of the image. And so this is very distracting because it keeps pulling your eye up there to that cloud, which has nothing to offer,
Can you
okay?
fix it in post-production?
The only way you can fix it is like clone it out or something. You can't adjust it because there's no data to adjust in there.
So you couldn't change the white balance and follow it over?
There's the white is beyond white.
Okay.
So like I said, you could clone it out and put a new cloud on top of it or something. That's it. Or put blue sky on top.
Cheat.
So yeah, you could cheat. So this is the blinkies. This is really funny because the PowerPoint conversion is doing this wrong. I did this in Keynote and converted the PowerPoint for Martin to play on his computer. But it's making the whole thing blink. That's funny. So in reality, the only part that should be blinking are the overexposed portions of the image on the back of the camera, okay? When you go into highlight warning, that's what happens. But that's funny, it's a little flaw, but everything else is working okay for the conversion thus far. So I would suggest you turn on the highlights warning or blinkies on your pictures so that when you review that image on the back of your camera, if there are parts that are overexposed and blown out, they'll be blinking at you so you know. So fixing exposure problems to editing, yeah, you can edit your photos. The bigger the change you make, it tends to start, dragging down the quality of your image. And like I judged the HUPS photo contest I had for, I don't know, a number of years. And sometimes there are images in there you could tell were like, adjusted 4 or 5 f-stops of exposure. And, it shows, you can tell by the noisiness and artifacts when you're doing that kind of editing. So just try to do your best to get the exposure properly before you take it into editing. And also, again, shooting a RAW will allow you to push that image a little more than if you shot it in JPEG. So we're going to talk on about, any questions about that last segment, anybody? Anybody on Zoom? Okay. We're moving on. So we're talking about strobe only exposures, okay? So these, like I said, are like night dives or just macro shots where you don't have any ambient light coming into play. Look at my pictures.
It's just so different.
Yeah, they actually look good on the computer. I think the display in the projectors are washed out because it's so bright in here, so much ambient light. It's not dark. Yeah, trust me, all these pictures are like really good.
Right on that screen.
Yeah, they're all quality. It may look washed out
We
of the
can all move
projector.
over there.
It's a good screen.
So anyways, yeah, it's the screen. Martin's screen made them look good. That's the only reason. So strobe only exposure, it's like I said, just images that we're not playing with ambient light at all. So the strobe only exposures are determined by your f-stop, your strobe output, your strobe to subject distance, and your ISO setting. Okay, and these are all things that can be adjusted to get the exposure right in line with what you're looking for. These are kind of in order that I would typically adjust as I'm diving. So for me, f-stop is the easiest thing to adjust on a strobe only exposure, because as long as I'm in the proper distance range and my strobe is in the proper ballpark setting, the f-stop will allow me to do that fine tuning very easily, just to turn up a little knob as I'm shooting. Okay.
Mike mentioned that because you're working with strobe only, that your shutter speed really doesn't have
Yeah,
any
no,
effect.
right. We're gonna pound that in today.
Okay.
Yes, the shutter speed does not matter in strobe only exposure, as long as you're within the ballpark range of your strobe strobe camera sync speeds. Okay, so usually for underwater, I'm macro only. I'm sorry. If I'm shooting macro with strobe only exposure, I would usually shoot around 1/200th of a second, because there's no reason to go slower. Just going to possibly introduce some blur. Okay, so you might as well shoot it off quick and get it done. Have a nice frozen image and no motion blur at all. So, and then, the next thing I would possibly adjust, if I'm too bright or too dim, I shoot manual strobes. I know, how many shoot TTL strobes?
That's when it has
When I
the
do.
connection.
Okay, well, there's connection either way, but yeah, you can set it either way. And how many shoot manual strobes? Okay. When I started doing digital, TTL wasn't working for me, and I just did manual, and I've been doing it ever since, even with different cameras. And I can shoot TTL now probably, but I'm so used to shooting manual, it's fine. And we'll talk about how I do that with my brain and stuff in here in a minute. But so the strobe power setting would be the next thing I would adjust, because it's a pain in the butt, because you got to take your hand off the camera and actually turn the knobs on the strobes to do a manual adjustment. And I usually only do that if I'm shooting macro, if I'm going from a subject that's really big and far to something that's much, much closer and tiny. Okay, because most of the time I'm able to make a manipulation just with the f-stop and get where I want. Because I'm not trying to photograph every single thing on the reef, from 3-foot long parrotfish to 1/2-inch nudibranchs. If I'm shooting macro, I'm shooting macro. I'm focused on that. That enables me not to have to keep manipulating too many parameters. So again, everything else constant. Changing the strobe power, you notice Mr. Potato Head changes. The background doesn't change at all, as you would expect. Okay. And then the other thing here that comes into play is your strobe to subject distance. Okay. And so sometimes if I have a really white subject that I'm really, really close to, and my strobes are right there close, even in my lowest strobe setting and f/22, it still could be overpowered. Okay, still could be too bright. So then I can actually pull the strobes back, because I still want that little bit of subject big in my frame, right, as I'm shooting. So I don't want to back up with the camera. So I would just pull the strobe back a little bit. Okay, or opposite would be moves closer to get more light on your subject. Okay.
Would that be true of constant light too, like your video?
Yeah,
lights?
the closer or further makes a huge difference.
Okay.
And so here, I'm actually just pulling Mr. Potato Head further away. So going from 1 foot to 2 foot to 3 feet, you can see it makes a big difference, keeping everything else constant in the exposure. Okay. And so,
David,
yes.
I've been working a little bit with this idea, and a close-up lens, with
Okay.
a flip.
Right.
And I'm having trouble because I think the close-up lens is in the way.
Is it making a shadow, you mean?
Yeah,
You
and
can't
sometimes
light in
I'm
there?
getting like a full shadow over it, but I can't figure out where exactly I'm supposed to put it.
And what kind of camera and close-up lens are you using?
I have the CMC on a mirrorless, an older mirrorless.
Uh-huh.
So it's like a little flipper with the CMC, naughty
It
cam
is.
CMC lens.
So when you're using the close-up lens, you're getting shadow in your image, you're saying?
Right.
Okay, well, when we get to strobe positioning, I'll show you a possible option for you, okay? It's coming
Okay.
up.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
I'm
And-
thinking something similar, David, in that with that new really close-up lens that you're supposed to be this close, it comes out circular no matter what I do. I'm doing
You
something.
have to send one. I'll try to look at it and see what's going on. But we'll talk about strobe positioning. I may help some of these ideas here. So with the strobe and your subject distance, there's something called the inverse square law. So if you cut the distance between your subject and your strobe in half, you'll get 4 times the amount of light on that subject. Okay, not double, 4 times. If you double the distance, so you go from shooting a subject at 1 foot to 2 feet, you're only going to get 1/4 the amount of light on that subject with everything else being set the same. Okay, so the key to it, you don't have to remember all this crap. The key to this, though, is that a relatively small change in the strobe to subject distance will make a dramatic difference in your exposure. Okay, how much light is hitting the subject, either more or less. Okay, and so that's a really important thing to understand. Just small changes in that distance will make a big difference in the amount of light getting to that subject. This also means that anything closer to the camera or closer to the strobe than your subject, like a sea fan getting in the way, is going to be really bright, right? And you don't want that. You don't want distracting elements that are really bright that you don't want everybody to immediately look at, okay, between your subject and the camera. And then also, on the opposite side, any objects that are behind the subject will see the strobe light fall off quite quickly as that distance behind the subject increases. And so if you're able to put a further distant object behind your subject, then that means that the background more fall to darkness, making your subject stand out. Versus if your subject is right in front of a brain coral or whatever, then that background's also going to be very well illuminated. So just keep that in mind when trying to compose your shot. Put some distance between your subject and the background. So for your strobe only exposures, typically I'm using like ISO 100 or 200. I rarely, if ever, manipulate the ISO for a strobe only underwater exposure. The only time I would do that is if I know I'm going to have to be firing off a lot of quick shots. So increasing my ISO a bit will allow me to shoot at a lower strobe setting, lower power output from my strobe. So then it's able to recycle a lot faster. Okay. So if any of y'all done like mandarinfish dives, they come up just for a few seconds and you're snapping away and then they're gone, right? And so you want to be able to snap off a lot of shots and not be bogged down by your strobe recycle time. So I would bump up my ISO a little bit in this situation, just so I can, pop those strobes off really rapidly and not worry about it. Another one is a situation we're doing on a night snorkel with silky sharks. And they would just come in for a quick pass and I would shoot off 5 or 10 pictures as they came by. Okay, so I bumped my ISO up here so I could shoot really quick and have those strobes pop, 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 and they never hesitated to recycle. Okay. But usually for macro, I'm shooting a very low ISO setting. So to get a good exposure, where do you start? You really need to understand your strobe and your camera and the settings, okay? Know how to adjust your different settings on your camera. And also you want to know your sweet spots for your aperture, your distance, strobe output, and ISO settings, okay? Back in the film days, all flashes, y'all remember this? All flashes had a strobe chart, okay? And so I'll show you how this works. So this is W, is for underwater. So you go here, let's say I'm shooting ISO 100 and my subject is say 2 feet. So feet is here. My subject is 2 feet away from my strobe. I go over here and it tells me at F11, I should shoot full output of my strobe. At F5.6, I should shoot a quarter output. And at F2.8, I would shoot at 1/16th output of my strobe. Okay. What's that? No. Okay, I'm sharing this because this is a very important concept for you to understand about your equipment, okay? It just tells you what combinations will work to give you a proper exposure. Even if you're using TTL, understanding those concepts and how that works together will help you improve the accuracy of your TTL, okay? I really suggest that you make a strobe chart for your own strobe. I don't tell you to go reference this while you're diving, but just so you know, like I know when I'm diving and I see something that's about 1.5 feet away, I know I could probably shoot F-16 with 3/4 power on my strobes. Okay, I got it memorized because I've done it a lot. But if you make this kind of chart, it will help you understand where you should be with your settings at different distances and different ISO settings. Okay, like I said, in the old days, all strobes had those charts on them, and some of them even had like a calculator, like a little thing you could turn. Like my Icolite big strobes had a little thing you would turn on the back to line up all the different variables and tell you which settings to use. But it really helps your brain, because once I learned all that, now it all makes sense. Okay. So, you know, there can be a lot of problems with your exposures. Your strobe part can be too bright or too dark. Your natural light portion can be incorrect, or both parts of your exposure can be incorrect. And a lot of times this happens when you're relying on your camera, you're shooting auto settings on your camera, and it doesn't know what you're trying to achieve, and it's trying to make everything average. Okay. So when you're shooting, if you want to get a good exposure, at the strobe part of your photo is too bright, these are the things you want to do. Okay. You manipulate these things to bring the brightness of your strobe part of your image down. Okay. Change to a smaller aperture, reduce your power setting on your strobe, or increase the strobe to subject distance, or possibly lower your ISO setting, which I would never mess with. And if you're using TTL, you know, you can use the strobe compensation, right? That plus or minus with the little lightning bolt usually is how it's symbols. It's a lightning bolt with the plus or minus next to it. That will allow you to bring the strobe power down or up. And then this is just the opposite. The strobe part is too dark. You would do the opposite of what we just talked about. Okay. So TTL, my take on TTL, back in the film days, I shot TTL a lot. And it was very helpful because you didn't know what you were shooting, where you're at. I used my little chart though, my strobe chart, so I knew it was in the ballpark for my TTL to do a good job. So it offers somewhat automatic flash control. I say somewhat because there are limitations. In TTL operation, the camera is measuring the light reflecting off the scene, and it shuts off the strobe when the camera detects a proper exposure. Okay, and for macro particularly, this can work very well as long as the subject fills a decent portion of the frame. Okay, and if your f-stop is in the correct ballpark for the strobe to subject distance. Okay, the problem with a lot of people is they go shoot TTL and they're flailing their settings all over the place. They don't know what's right and what's wrong. So where TTL really struggles though is like if you have a small squid surrounded by darker blue water, that squid's going to turn out probably overexposed because the camera's trying to make that dark water all neutral. 18% gray is what it's trying to do actually. So TTL can be quicker when a special opportunity arises. It can do the fine tuning when you're in the ballpark with your exposure already. And especially helpful when shooting a subject approaching the camera, like a shark or a turtle swimming right at you. For me, I'd be shooting it, adjusting the f-stop, but at some point my strobe power would be too much, even with changes in f-stop, and I need to stop and adjust my strobes, and by then the turtle or shark would be gone, right? So TTL can really help a lot in that kind of situation when those distances are changing. And it requires a little less brake power than shooting a manual probably. Problem on TTL, like I said, beginner photographers set the camera on TTL and they just go out shooting. You still got to understand that f-stop, strobe output, and strobe to subject relationship. So if you're shooting a white subject, like a white flounder on white sand, really close, and your f-stop's on f2.8 for some reason, more than likely it's going to be overexposed because your TTL is not going to be able to shut off that exposure quickly enough because that thing's going to get blown out almost instantaneously. And if you're shooting a really dark subject 3 feet away, like a black grouper, and your camera is set on f22, it's probably going to be underexposed because your camera cannot make more output than that strobe does as a max output. Okay, so having the wrong setting there is causing problems. So understanding your f-stops and your distance and your strobe power will help you utilize TTL more successfully. So again, I'm a fan of shooting the camera in manual mode. If you want to use TTL and strobe, great. No one use what we just talked about, that little strobe chart for the distance relationships. Fill the frame or at least the metered area. So if you're in center weighted metering, you just need to get to the very center portion of the image filled with your subject. Okay. And that will help the metering system and TTL system expose it properly. Remember, a TTL can shut off the strobe before a full dump of the strobe, but it can't make more light output than a full dump of the strobe. Okay, and that's what we're talking about. Shooting a too small aperture at a distant subject is going to not result in a proper exposure. So this is a good article on using TTL by Icolite, and Icolite has done a lot with underwater and TTL. That's one of their big strong points for their housings and strobes. So it's a good article. So now we're moving on to natural light images. And in a minute, we're going to put natural light and strobe images together. So it's possible to create pleasing images without a strobe at all. And program mode or auto mode actually can do a good job in this situation, as long as you have that middle light level, not real dark image you're working with. But shooting in manual will also help out. So these are just some examples of natural light images. Here we're shooting at pretty wide open aperture of f5 and 1/60th of a second, slow enough to get that background to show up. Okay, and this is an old DSLR that I wouldn't shoot much higher than 400, so 200 was middle already. Again, a couple of examples of natural light images and the settings. So sunbeams, if you see sunbeams, if it's a calm day on the surface, is very calm, that's when you can get your sunbeams in the water. And you want to shoot at a minimum of 125th of a second, so 1/125th of a second shutter speed to try to freeze those sunbeams. So natural light images are controlled by your shutter speed, your f-stop, and your ISO. Okay, so most cameras have an exposure meter. Has anybody ever used exposure meter on their camera? If you're shooting manual, hopefully you do. If you're shooting wide angle, it'll tell you what your exposure with the current settings is going to be, overexposed or underexposed. And you can have full frame metering that looks at the whole image, or you can have like a spot metering that looks at the very center little dot, or center weighted metering which just looks at the center portion of the image to decide the exposure. So these are camera meters actually inside my camera. So here we're going from 5.6 to f14 for your f-stops. And I don't know why the Nikon does this backwards, but so at 5.6, it's saying it's going to be slightly overexposed. See the plus, heading toward the plus a little bit. Oh yeah, you can't see very well on the big screen. And at f14, it's going to be slightly overexposed. See, it's, sorry, underexposed. That's a negative right there. And so this is what you want to look at when you're trying to do your blue water exposures, okay? So, and if you have live view on your camera, you can just adjust it with the live view and make sure that blue water looks good, okay? You don't have to worry about that little meter. I still use meters. So natural light images, you want to set your f-stop or shutter speed first based on your priorities. Do you want depth of field or do you want to freeze action, what have you? You set one of those first, and then you use a meter or live view to determine the other setting to get that proper blue water, okay? And if it's particularly a dark scene, you can bump up your ISO, okay? I mentioned sunbeams, a minimum of 1/25th of a second to freeze the sunbeams. So if the natural light portion of your image is too dark, you can go to a slower shutter speed, a larger aperture, or a higher ISO to get the natural light portion to go brighter, okay? If the natural light portion of your image is too bright, you can go to a faster shutter speed, a smaller aperture, or a lower ISO, okay? But it's really important to understand how to control those. And if your camera doesn't have manual mode, you can use exposure compensation, that plus or minus button, to adjust for the blue water. Because sometimes the cameras that don't have manual mode will try to make that blue water brighter blue than what you think it should be. And so bringing that down on the negative side, exposure compensation will help subdue that color of the water. Oh, hear me. I don't know why I just saw that. That's yours, right? So, to me, a wide angle shot with a really nice exposed blue water background looks great. I mean, that's a happy coral reef that I want to spend time on, right? And so it's really important to understand how to do these exposures. And so to balance the strobe and natural light, you really need to think of it as taking two photos in one, okay? The first one is going to be the strobe illuminated portion. Okay, in the second photo, that's all gonna be combined in there, is the natural light illuminated portion. Because you're having to make adjustments for both of these different scenes in one photo. Okay, the strobe exposure is controlled by these things on the left. Your f-stop, ISO, strobe output, strobe to subject distance. The natural light exposure is controlled by your f-stop, ISO, and shutter speed. So what we know is here that shutter speed is the magic bullet for controlling the natural light exposure. Okay, if you get everything looking good with your strobe exposure, but your blue water is too dark or too light, all we gotta do is adjust that shutter speed. Okay, and you can get that pretty blue water. So what I do, I meter the background to determine the correct shutter speed and f-stop for the blue water. And then given that f-stop that I generate from that, that will help me determine how my strobes are gonna work, what power output I need my strobes on. Because if the f-stop for the blue water says F11, then I put my strobes about halfway, half power. If this blue water metering says my strobes need to be on F5.6, then I need to turn my strobes down because they're going to put out way too much light if I use them at half power at 5.6. Okay.
If you're in live view though,
You can see it, but you can't see what your strobe's going to do.
and you can't see,
You can see the blue water, but you can't see what your strobe's going to do.
but when you go to take it off the SD card and put it on the computer, it's gonna be different than what you're seeing because of the light of the
Some of the
live
cameras
view.
are different how live view works. So I can't answer that. Like my mirrorless cameras, live view apply settings, I think it's called, is what I have selected in my camera menu. And so that means if I go changing my shutter speed and f-stop, my screen is going to show what it's going to capture. Okay. But the other way it can be set is that the screen's always going to look bright to help you compose and focus the shot.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So you need to understand which way your camera's set up.
okay.
You use live view when you shoot, or you use your viewfinder. What are you doing?
Viewfinder.
So, but the benefit of live view is that you can typically, if your camera is configured the right way, see actually what's going to get recorded on the viewfinder or the display. If you have a modern mirrorless camera, newer mirrorless camera. So once you get your strobe exposure good, you fine tune it a little bit with that shutter speed and get that blue water looking the right color that you really want. And again, the shutter speed is the one to manipulate because it will not impact your strobe exposure. Okay. Once you get the strobe exposure nailed down properly, just play with that shutter speed to get that blue water. So when I meter for blue water, I don't aim at the very top bright light blue water. I don't aim at the dark blue water. I aim at the middle blue water. Okay. To help get that reading. And that's the water you kind of want to emulate there, that middle. So again, just
So
gonna.
is that something you do, for instance, once you are off the wall?
If I'm shooting wide angle, yes. When I'm just, before I even see a subject, I will meter at that depth that I'm going to be diving at. I will meter for the blue water. So now it's locked in. I got my settings already locked in and I can set my strobe output based on that blue water exposure.
And then as soon as you turn back to the wall and you start seeing critters, you're just shooting.
Yeah, I can shoot it. Yeah. And then that will change some depending on which direction you're aiming toward or away from the sun. If you're aiming higher in the water or lower in the water, that will need to be manipulated.
And then you change your shutter speed. To
Yeah, just change the shutter speed a little bit, right? So I'm just showing examples and you can see the settings that I use for these different settings with the blue water background and strobe illuminated photos. And like I said, to me, this is really the essence of a dive. This is like what kind of stuff I like to share. I really prefer shooting wide angle. I shoot a lot of macro too, but I really like wide angle better. And in recs also, before you go into rec, turn around and get a blue water exposure in the blue water. And when you're inside the rec, anytime you're shooting through an opening in the rec, showing the outside, you'll see that nice blue. Or if you're shooting in the area, a lot of caves and openings and stuff, same thing. Meter the blue water, and when you go inside that little cave or opening, when you're looking out, you'll have that blue water exposure nailed down. So this is in a cenote. And, you know, I kind of had to push things a bit at 5.6 and it's pretty wide open and 1/60th shutter speed because that was just very faint blue light from the background opening. Okay. And cranking the ISO up also was necessary to get those settings to work. Otherwise, I'd be going to a really low shutter speed. And you can also do these techniques with macro. Now you have to be in a more shallow area with brighter water. This is probably like 20 feet deep right here. So if you get in a situation where you have a subject, you can shoot up toward the sky and the water's clear and it's a sunny day, try to put some blue water behind your macro subjects. Okay. It just adds a little different look. And I say avoid the blahs. In my opinion, black backgrounds are okay, blue backgrounds are okay, but this one on the right is kind of a blah background. I don't like that. Okay. So try to, avoid the blahs. So talk a bit about strobes. One strobe versus two. For years, I shot with one strobe. It's cheaper, smaller, lighter, faster, and easier to learn. Benefit of the disadvantage of one strobe is that you get more hard shadows, less coverage, and less creative flexibility. So one strobe is fine. It's easier to travel with, to dive with, and to shoot with. It's a lot less technically challenged to learn how to just use one strobe. Just taking out that extra variable of a second strobe. And for many shots, one strobe is just fine. Okay, these are all single strobe shots. Not a big deal. So to me, two strobes, the main reason I need two is to get rid of some hard shadows. And also when I'm shooting wide angle with a fisheye lens, I really find that I need the two strobes for that sort of situation. So along with strobes comes backscatter. Backscatter, as we all know, is the bane of every photographer. It's the result of light reflected off particles in the water. More particles and more backscatter, or the potential for more backscatter. It can be minimized by strobe placement and getting close. So here we have an example of the threaded backscatter. So this is, your typical person out there aiming their strobes right at their subject, which is that starfish, and all these little asterisks are particles in the water. So you get a lot of particles between the lens and the subject that can have backscatter bouncing back into the camera. So by aiming the strobes properly, because remember, light doesn't come out straight from the strobe, it comes out in a cone, okay? That now we're not illuminating all these extra particles here, okay? But my favorite way to minimize backscatter is just to get closer, okay? Getting closer really eliminates those particles between the camera and the subject. And it works way better than aiming your strobes right. So how to get closer? First, you need really good buoyancy and trim. Okay, trim is the angle at which you're in the water, you're swimming along. If you're naturally swimming along in the water and your feet are down, you're constantly kicking to keep up, that's not good trim, okay? As a photographer, you want to be horizontal in the water, okay? And that allows you to get very close to your subjects in the reef, okay? You want to shoot appropriate size subjects for your lens. If you have a macro lens on, don't go trying to take a picture of the jewfish, okay? Maybe the jewfish's eye or mouth, but not the whole jewfish, okay? Because you have to get so far away, it's pointless. If you're shooting wide angle type scenes, have a really wide angle lens or a fisheye lens. I can get about a foot from the reef and have a huge section of reef in my photo, okay? And I'm shooting on through 1 foot of water and 1 foot worth of particles to create backscatter. If you're doing macro type stuff, use a macro lens that you can get really close. Like my 60mm lens I use most of the time when I shoot macro, I can shoot stuff, just a few inches from the port of the camera, okay? Not shooting through much water at all. And just do it. So often I see photographers approach a subject that's stationary and they'll stop 3 feet, 4 feet away and start taking pictures of it. And I'm like, no, get close, get right up to it. If you want to take a picture and then move closer, great, but get close to your subjects. A couple other things to help and reduce the look of backscatter in your images is when you get that blue water background, go with a little lighter color blue rather than a darker color blue, because the lighter blue will hide those little bright spots of the backscatter better than the dark blue, okay? When you underexpose that blue water background, that's when you really see that backscatter. And also shoot at an angle to include more reef as the background, less open water. Okay, because open water is really where that backscatter can show up. So question of where to aim your strobes. The best answer is to aim where you want the light to go. Okay, very simple. I have a link in here to a backscatter video, and it's all about the zen of strobe placement or something. And that's what he talks about. Is I can't answer where you should aim your strobes because it depends on the subject and the situation. But you want to move the strobe around to highlight your subject's face or any special features of the scene. Okay, but you want to be aware of any foreground or background distracting elements that you want to avoid illuminating. So, for macro, I'll just tell you what I do here. Usually I shoot something like this, okay? If I'm using a single strobe. This is what I call Jackie Reed style. If you don't know Jackie Reed, he was a great photographer. I pretty much always do it like this, okay? And now if the subject is further away than say a foot from your lens, you pull that strobe up higher. Backscatter says, and one of the things, that for every foot away, more than a foot away, the subject is from the lens, they pull the equal amount up above the housing, because that way you're not illuminating all that dead water with the backscatter. Okay, so if it's something's real close, a foot or less, I had the strobe just like that. If it's 3 feet away, which would be very rare, I would shoot something so far away, I would pull that strobe up a couple feet above my housing probably and aiming straight ahead. So the big drawback of this kind of setup is if you're going to shoot the camera vertical for a subject that's more, positioned for a vertical shot, if you turn it the wrong way, you'll be illuminating the back of the head. So you always want to turn it the right way to illuminate the face of the subject. So here, the strobe is on this side, and we're illuminating the back of the head and mashed potato head. And here it's on this side. The angle's exaggerated to show this, but here we got the light on the subject. So the real world situation, it's a seahorse, and I originally turned my single strobe to the left and shot it, and then I realized what I was doing. So I turned it to the right, and you can see the shadows on the face of the seahorse because I had the strobe on the wrong side of its head. Okay, so always keep that in mind. Where is the face and where is my light? Okay, I see a lot of new photographers with one strobe. They always hear, don't want to have your strobe close to the camera. You want it off to the side to minimize backscatter. So you'll see them out there with the strobe way out here, and they're out there taking pictures of everything with that strobe like that. So what you end up with is really, really hard shadows. So this is that kind of setup. And then this is the method I'm proposing, putting it right on top, okay? And so you get these really hard shadows when you're shooting the strobe like this. And this is even worse here, is that the fish is turned the other way.
Right.
So now the light's going on the fish's butt, okay? And you have a shadow on the fish's face. Don't be this person, okay? Because that always drives me crazy when I see that. So this is a situation where that strobe way off to the right can work if you have the face aimed in the right way. Okay, so now the shadows are falling where you want them to fall, and the light is where you want it to fall. So always keep in mind, where is the face? So for macro, usually I'm shooting like 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock for just swimming around. It will change on the subjects when I see different subjects, but this is just the go-to settings kind of. And if I turn the camera vertically, I will turn one of these strobes. So it's not on the bottom, but here and here, and this would be on the top. And so you don't want to underlight, shine light up from the bottom of your subject, because it looks like Halloween or something, right? And then tucked sage, and this, I don't know will help you or not, but this is a situation that I shoot a lot of really small stuff. I put my strobes like this. I'm aiming them straight into the subject, okay? Virtually it won't see any backscatter, and the shadows are controlled. If you want shadows on one side or another, you can adjust your strobe output to do that. But this will probably help get any shadows caused by your camera equipment eliminated. Does that make sense, Sage? Have you tried that?
Why would that eliminate backscatter?
Because now the light is reflecting off the strobes going this way, not going this way. I don't do this for 3 feet away thing, but very close, minimal distance.
The problem with those with the CMCs though, is this kind of setup can also refract through.
Okay, get the flare,
Cause a little
flare.
flare like that.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah, I have not had any problem with this for causing flare, but I don't use the CMC type things.
Yeah, I did, no, shooting still.
Okay.
It can just zoom up and get rid of it. It doesn't, it's not.
But to me, this has worked really well, like muck diving for very, very small stuff. It works good.
I'm sorry, it's CMC.
It's like a little close-up lens. It goes on the
Oh.
front of your.
It's not a cam diopter.
Oh, what we were talking about earlier? That's a CMC? Okay, thank you.
So that's what I was talking about there. So for wide angle, typically I'm pulling my strobes about 18 inches off to the left and right sides. And slightly above, well behind the lens. So this again, I'm shooting with fisheye lenses, and I aim them outward a bit, 10 to 15 degrees outward. Pulling them back helps them from getting in the shot, and also helps spread the light beam, that cone of light, before they reach the subject. So something like this. And as I put this black and white dotted line in here, because the strobe faces are actually behind the housing, okay? When you have it too far forward, you can actually get them in the photo or the hotspots from them in the photo. So like this, the strobe wasn't far enough back here, and you get this ugly backscattery hotspot area up in the corner. So by pulling them further back than you ever think they need to be, honestly, it will help minimize that. For close focus wide angle, you got to bring those strobes back in close to the housing again, and try to, just aim them straight to intersect that light cone with your subject. You see people with these ginormous strobe arms. This is my buddy in Galapagos. And I have these strobe arms too, but I'm only going to use them if I'm shooting something really big that I'm not getting close to. Like a wreck, trying to illuminate the most I can on a wreck, or maybe shyer big stuff, like maybe manta rays or something like that, and you can't get super close to. That's the only time you want those things way out there, because when you're doing that and you're close to a reef or something, you're going to have dead spots, black spots, dark spots in the middle that the strobe is not reaching when they're way out to the side like that. So these are just starting positions. You always want to move them around based on your subject and thinking about where the shadows are going to fall, where's the light going to hit, and feel free to move those strobes around. And keep in mind that the closer to an object the strobe is, the more light it will reflect. I say try to make it light evenly. A lot of people don't like that phrase, but try to balance the light, let's say, on your subject. If there are light colored objects between the camera and the primary subject, be sure to position the strobe to avoid them. So here's a common thing. You got a macro subject on the reef, but you got some real bright object right next to or slightly in front of the subject. When that strobe hits that sucker's going to be so bright right there, that's all anybody's going to see when they look at that image, okay? So consider that before shooting. Either approach from a different angle to get rid of that foreground element, turn that right side strobe power way down so it's just barely putting a little pop of light on that side, or try to aim the strobe to minimize that distraction, not illuminate it. This is a good article with strobe positioning I mentioned. There's actually a video and some articles there talk about how to position your strobe in different situations. I personally use diffusers pretty much all the time. I think they make the light look softer and just a little more attractive, not so harsh. Here's an example with the diffuser, and look at under the hat, the brim of the hat, Mr. Potato Head, and without a diffuser. See how that harsh shadow line appears? Okay, I personally don't usually want that. Sometimes if you're trying to highlight texture, that can be beneficial. So Craig, I'm gonna keep going a little bit. We're almost done. And I'm planning on running over a little bit. As long as we're out here by 4, we're fine. Okay, so snoots. How many of y'all shoot with snoots or a snoot? Okay, yeah, you're gonna want to. So basically, a snoot is a device added to a light source to limit the angle of emitted light. Snoots can be bought or homemade of anything. PVC funnel, old wetsuit arms. But to me, my store-bought option is really good. So why use a snoot? They allow the photographer to light only the subject, making it stand out from the background. Okay, coral reefs are obviously very distracting. Muck dives, very distracting backgrounds. So this can really help a lot to make that subject stand out. It limit where the lights go, so also minimize backscatter. Okay, so that's very helpful also. And it also will add drama to your images. So here's a nice shot of a blue ring octopus jumping from rock to rock. It's a good shot, but it's not real dramatic. But here's a similar subject. This is a matote, which is a cousin of a blue ring. It only has one blue ring, but it's about the same size as the previous creature. But this is shot with a snoot, totally different look. Okay, looks totally different, right? And people have preference of what they want. You may like it the other way, I don't know. So same, seahorse, it's not exactly the same one, but same species. Going in with the mucky background, which really adds nothing to the image, but taking away a lot of that background with the snoot makes the subject stand out more. If you have a pretty background, there's no reason to hide it, right? I mean, it's something complementary, colorful, whatever. If the background's nice, I say don't snoot it, right? But if you have a yucky background or a distracting background, the busy background, that's a perfect candidate to utilize a snoot to get that subject to stand out. Okay,
And if you're wanting to eliminate background and you don't have the snoot, you would just change your depth of field.
well, depth field would make it blurrier, but it'd still be illuminated.
That's true.
If you put some distance between the subject and the background, or also shoot at a higher shutter speed, so you absolutely get no ambient light in the background, just your strobe, and the strobe will fall off. But it depends. If there's something right behind your subject, it's still going to be illuminated. Yeah. And also just ordinary subjects, the snoot lighting can really make this ordinary things kind of stand out, be more attractive, more artsy, I'd say. Instead of showing up the background here, if you had the coral rubble in the background, it wouldn't look nearly as interesting as it does, I think, with the black background. So snoots, all your snoots. So you can buy snoots to mount on current strobes that you may have, okay? I personally have never used any of those. I did some homemade snoots. They did not work out well for me. But what has worked out well for me is this guy, Backscatter Mini Flash. They actually just came out with the Mini Flash 2. I still have Mini Flash 1. I have it over here if anybody wants to see it. But they make it really easy. It's a flash and snoot design from the beginning to be used as one package. Okay, it's not a strobe and somebody built something to go on the strobe randomly. It was built together with this intention. And it works very well. Designed together, it has a very powerful LED aiming light, so you know exactly where that snoot light flash is going to go. You have circular and oval aperture cards, so you can change the size of the beam and shape of the beam. Backscatter claims it to be the smallest, brightest, easiest to use snoot strobe combination available, and I believe it. 7 power settings, 3 aiming light settings, and the new one offers TTL for Olympus and OM system cameras. I love this thing. Okay, it's really awesome. These are the aperture cards, circular and oval, so you can see you can cover different sizes of subjects. Backscatter has a number of videos that are really well done to teach you how to use this thing. So if you do have one, or if you're going to buy one, watch the videos and really learn the tricks.
Can you go back to that picture where you showed the pictures of was that all one or was that 3 different ones?
This is one thing. So on the left is showing the
the
snoot
same
and the
thing.
flash, and on the right, they're put together.
Oh, okay.
The
Same
combo.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's all put
So it's
together.
a focus light and the strobe with the snoot.
Yes, it has to be a focus light because otherwise you don't know where the snoot is aiming and it's very small. The light coming out of it is very small. So if you don't have a focus light to tell you where it's going to hit your subject, it's pointless. Yes,
It's a flash.
it's a flash,
Right.
but it also has an aiming light. So you can turn it on a constant light so you know where that flash is going to pop off at. Let's see. So snoots have optimal working distances. So if you move in and out, the light quality of light will change. Okay. And it's important to kind of work out the right distance. And it will vary depending on what size aperture card or opening you're using. And also you have a hard edge or a soft edge. So your personal taste will dictate which you prefer. Let's see. So here's just showing a little example on the left. It's kind of where it's a soft edge. On the right, it's focused in a little more where it's a hard edge. And that, again, just by moving in and out a little bit changes that. I personally like the soft edge typically.
What is it that you're moving?
The distance between the snoot and the subject.
So that what looked like a plate with the different openings?
That's different sizes. It's like you put in there. We can look after.
Okay, okay,
I have it over here.
cool.
But anyways, so the trick is, how do I hold this thing or how do I aim this thing? I've seen people actually just hand holding it. That's a little challenging. If you need 2 hands to hold your camera, if you can use your camera on one hand, then you can do that. If you have a small Olympus or something like that, you can do that. I've seen people doing it. That way you can just aim at subject and shoot away. I've seen people use tripod, like in buck diving. They put the tripod and it's aiming at the eel sticking out of the sand or whatever. Then they can move their camera around and take different shots at different angles. I personally use it on a very short strobe arm mounted on the cold shoe of my housing. Okay, so like this. So this is my cold shoe in the housing. I have a very short arm and the flash and the snoot, and then I can move it around. So I'll dive with my regular strobes for taking pictures of an angelfish swimming by or whatever. I'll use those. But then I see something that's really suitable for the snoot. I can just disconnect my fiber optic from one of the strobes and plug it into this because it's triggered by fiber optic. And then I'll shoot the snoot. And then if I want to go back to my 2 strobes again, I can put the fiber optic back. So I can change that underwater very simply, very easily, but it leaves me all the flexibility. On a dive, I may not see a single subject that I want to use a snoot on, or I may see a bunch of stuff I want to use a snoot on, but I have the flexibility of going both ways while I'm down there. And when I get onto the boat or hand the camera up to the boat, I usually park it kind of like this. I have a clip to hold my strobe arms together, and I park that thing above it and just lock it in place there. So it's not, too unwieldy to handle and carry. The area that the strobe is illuminating, the snoot is illuminating, is very, very small. Okay, so it's challenging to find your subject in the viewfinder with the light on it. So, usually if I see someone take a picture of something, or the guy just pointed out something and it's shy, I'll go to a rock and I'll get however close I think I'm going to get to that subject, focus on that, put the snoot right there at that position. So when I actually get to the subject, I'm ready to roll. Okay, I'm not having to go up to the subject and fiddle around with everything for a minute to get it situated. For stationary things, a lot of times I'll look over the housing, I'll sort of focus on the subject, and if my snoot is off aim somewhere else, I'll look over and bring the snoot to where the subject is, and then move back to my viewfinder and start shooting. It is challenging. It takes some practice to get this thing lined up.
The backscatter strobe doesn't have a sighting light, does it?
Yeah, it has 3-level modeling light. Yeah, it's really, really good. It
And the
works.
light is actually on.
Yeah, it'll be exactly where the strobe is hitting with the snoot. The modeling light is right where the strobe's going to hit. That's the big benefit of that design. And if you lock it in place and you don't change your focus, now you can just move up to other things about the same size and same distance, and it's all ready to go. Okay, and that's what that's about right here. It's not changing that focus. Be able to move right in. So when you use a snoot, minimal current, if current's ripping, you're not gonna be able to do it. You're not gonna be doing this on a drift dive on the wall. Like muck dives, slow paced dives, shore dives, where you have that extra time. If you're trying to stay up with a group, it's not gonna work for you, okay? Things that won't swim away, because you gotta get close for these things to be really utilized. Day or night dives, you can do either one. If it's a really, really shallow dive, like 20 feet, less than 20 feet, maybe, really bright sun, it can be a little more challenging because it's harder to see that modeling light to know where that snoot's going to be aiming. I suggest, where to start. First thing you gotta keep in mind, when you get in the water, you have to burp the air out of your snoot, okay? If you don't, there'll be a bubble in there and things won't work right. So you have to burp it. You wanna use a higher shutter speed to keep out the ambient light. You wanna use aperture of f16 or so also to keep out the ambient light. And also helps get more depth of field because you're shooting small stuff. Start with those stationary subjects. And use a small opening in the snoot card as you can get away with, okay? Because if you have a really big opening in the snoot card, then it's kind of pointless using the snoot. You want it to be a small opening, a small beam of light going on that subject. And avoid shooting down. When you shoot down your subjects with the snoot, that's when you see that black ring of light around, or white ring of light around the subject. Is when you're shooting down too much. If you start shooting with snoot, you're gonna have a lot of things like this, where things aren't aligned properly and you're gonna get pissed off. But it's just kind of part of the learning curve. And once you get going, you'll start getting some nice shots. That the snoot really improves versus regular strobe lighting. Okay, so again, got to give it a go. So besides using the snoot, how can you create a darker background?
Shutter speed.
Shutter speed will help, right? And utilizing that distance, trying to get distance between your subject and the background. When you look into composition, look how far the background is behind your subject and move to make it further. These are all basic guidelines. Look at the scene, determine what you want to light. Keep in mind for a natural look, you don't want the light coming from underneath, you want it coming from above. And use your brain more than your shutter finger. Don't just go up there shooting willy-nilly. Think about what you're doing before you shoot. And that's it. And Craig, I'm sorry I talked so long. Let's go. If you have questions, let me know. And I have my snoot up here if anybody wants to see it.
Yeah, I just have a comment on a couple of things. A lot of what you said relieved me from having to say some things. But on the flash trigger, if you're using your flash with a fiber optic, you don't need to flash it on a high power. You put it on manual and put it on the very lowest setting. This is a trick I learned
Yeah, I have
Tom
mine,
Collier taught me
yeah,
that.
I have mine like 164
Yeah,
power.
set it as low as possible. And then it won't heat up your housing and it doesn't eat your battery.
And it's recycled fast.
Yeah, it'll recycle a lot faster. The second thing about ISO, I would say, I don't have any disagreement at all with what you said, but the worst thing you can do is have sort of high ISO fear and underexpose to stay away from higher ISO. Because yeah, ISO itself, it's an amplifier. So it's like your stereo at home. If you turn it up, you get some noise in the amplifier itself, some distortion. But most of us honestly can't hear it. The amplifiers are so good now. And the same is true with the ISO amplifiers. They don't add much noise. Where you really run into the trouble is if you underexpose, because then you haven't sampled the lower energy parts of the wave field. And trying to bring those back up in processing is where it looks really, really nasty. So I would say if you're going to shoot, put your ISO to get the best exposure you can. If it's too noisy, okay, that happens.
It depends on the camera. If you have an older generation,
Yeah, older ones, that's
yeah,
they're
the current new cameras, they do high ISO.
I had one thing that I was gonna say a lot earlier, but I held off, and this is a good time, is that you have to understand that for most cameras, the amount of noise that you get is very much proportional to the size of the sensor. If you're shooting with a full frame, 35 millimeter, you're looking at a pretty good size sensor there, and the pixels to get you 25 megabyte files, things like that, are going to be pretty fat, and they gather a lot of light for the same amount of time. If you go with a 4/3 sensor, that's 1/4 the size, and to get the same number of pixels, like 25 megapixel camera, you're dealing with pixels that are 1/4 the size, and so you get a lot more noise for the same amount of light you get. So like if you're working with a GoPro that has a very tiny one, even though you get a lot of pixels, if you put it up around 800 to 1,000, you're going to see a lot of those, a lot of noise, the purples and the greens and the black backgrounds and everything like that.
Okay, I'm going to pass this around. I have it on the lowest setting for the modeling light. And you can, if you want to play with the aperture, just see how small it will go, how large it will go.
I will make a comment that I have the same snoot. I have the new constant light, which is basically a video light that fits with that snoot and gives me 4,400 lumens with it. 4,300. Yeah, 4,300. 4,300.
Uses the same.
But it can also do narrow beam, so it's a little bit.
So do you want to sell your old?
My old one.
Oh, everybody's probably got two of them.
No, all my old snoots were just.
Well, the same snoot fits most of the backscatter stuff. So if you buy the new one and you've got an older model, you could use the old snoot.
No, I didn't know which one.
But it does have these
And it's
controls for the
different
aperture,
size.
right?
There it is.
It uses the same snoot, the video light talking about.
Let's just try running it. Let's see what.
But the snoot, like, it's the video light that's the two.
Okay, so this is the flash and a snoot.
No,
That's what makes it
Dennis
the
has,
two.
yeah, Dennis has a video light with the same snoot. They also make a video light that fits that same snoot on it.
And that's the new.
Well, it's been around a while. No, the
One
new
you showed
one,
that was
the
on the
new one
right.
is the brand new, the new version of this one. It looks the same as that, but it has some different features.
And it has a different snoot.
No, same snoot.
Same
Snoot's
snoot
exactly
as
the
the
same.
last.
Yes, it's just the main thing they added was the TCL for the this cameras.
It's.
That's one of the big things.
And the OLED.
Showing the presentation screen. It's, yeah, you can do that one and I'll just run the presentation.
This one?
Yeah. And you may just kill it for video.
The issue,
Yeah.
the reason I don't just only use those,
Apparently,
reset the time is not fast.
And that's okay.
So like one of those.
Yeah, yeah, we were all playing.
Yeah, I think it'd be a near impossible to find.
Yeah.
The subject and line up on the microphone. My opinion.
Yeah.
But
That's
actually,
okay.
You want to keep this over here?
Yeah.
on my house, lighting up.
And I'm still not.
Well, isn't the smoke
seem to be
creating
there.
activate black water dye?
Well, we're talking about blackwater dye stuff in the deep water, middle of the deep water column.
Right, right,
The creatures.
right.
Yeah, yes, but the problem with that, I think utilizing that, blackwater dye, it'd be very hard to line up your subject and
And find
the
it.
smooth.
Yeah,
Which
Is it sharing?
it's hard enough just with
Yeah,
the
okay.
lens.
with something that's stationary.
Yeah, so you have no reference, it's not moving, it's just, everything's moving.
Okay, we better get going if we're gonna get through.
Let's go, sorry.
If you're interested in video, let's see. Like I said, okay, I give up. How do you go to the next? Who do you just click this?
You should be able to just push.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for showing up. So I'm gonna have a lot of philosophy in here because I figure if you're doing underwater shooting, you're a philosopher already, full of pain and disappointment and kind of like marriage. So at times, for some people, not us. Okay. Okay, so I was thinking about it. Why is underwater video so difficult? And it's kind of instructive to me anyway to think about how real people shoot movies as opposed to underwater guys. So in Hollywood or Netflix or Nat Geo, they have a script, they have a scene they're going to shoot, they know what the look is supposed to be that they're trying to get in the scene. Is it a love scene? Is it a fight scene or whatever? They have actors, they have action, it's all well defined, and they've got a crew. And so they go out and set up and get specific cameras. In fact, they shoot totally different from us. They decide, what do I want this to look like? And then they'll choose their lens and their lighting and all of that to achieve the look, as opposed to we choose all that stuff to get a picture of the subject. So they got multiple takes to get it right. Us, no script, vague idea what might be down there. We film whatever's there. The camera and lighting equipment are chosen based on our expectations and often for flexibility, like David just showed you. I want to be able to shoot the whale shark plus the pygmy seahorse if they come by. And often you get just one shot at it. So that's all different. And underwater, it's even a little different because I'm going to say, what do you even mean by get it right? What do you, so that's the first thing I want to say is you need to answer that question for yourself. What am I trying to achieve when I go underwater? And once you get that in mind, then you can kind of play like a Hollywood guy and say, okay, if I want to achieve this, then this is what I need to do to get there. So it's taken me about 15 years to learn that simple fact, but we seem to get caught up in the technical details of the thing. So the first thing you want to know is, well, what do I want to shoot and with what? So I just made a list of things here: stills and video, action camera, wide angle, macro, super macro, natural lighting, night dive, backscatter, fluoral lighting, blue, UV, or all of the above. Well, so to get going on that, then you have to decide what kind of light you want to buy, and that's going to be determined by what you decided you wanted to try to do. And so I thought it would be fun to have show and tell here because I've got a museum of failed attempts at lighting, and I'm going to show you some of the things. So my first light, still in, right here.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't pay what I paid for it.
About $500.
Oh, I got you beat. So 10 years ago, I was headed off onto a dive trip somewhere, and I'd heard they had these underwater lights, LEDs had just come out. Look how many of them there are on there. And ordered off of Amazon. I still got the order. It was $700 for a 1200 lumen light.
Yep.
Mine was 400.
So
Mine was like,
now I want to talk about the way these things work. Of course, this thing slides back and forth and has different levels and so on. You can go back and go red if you want to, but the main thing for me is to figure out the battery and the control situation. because that's going to determine a lot of what you're able to do underwater. So I don't like these sliding switches at all. We've got several different types of lights that have the sliding switch. And I'll show you what I do like. The next thing that happened, of course, I actually shot some video with this and made some good films, but had to stay really close to everything. Also, Tom was there, so I sneaked up and cheated and got some of his light a few times when he was shooting stuff. But I decided I wanted to not give up on stills, but I wanted something that would let me do flash and video at the same time. And right about this time, 2016, I guess, something like that, 15 or 16, I found this light made by a company called Dive Sight. And it was carried on blue water for a while, backscatter for a while. I had a little problem with one of them. I called backscatter and I talked to our friend Rob there, and he told me, oh, that's a piece of trash. That thing's no good. You don't want to have video light and strobe together at the same time and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I thought it was really cool. One battery, okay, the battery's replaceable. That's one of the problems with the solar lights, is the battery's not easily replaceable. If you want to crack it open and get a soldering iron, you can do it. But this one, you can buy some other batteries, extras, while you're diving. You can be charging the other one. So that, for me, that's a big deal. I want to be able to have a second set of batteries that I could buy. And unfortunately, these batteries, they're going to get you one way or the other. It's like $250 for a battery or something. But it works really well. Still works quite nice. It's a 32 guide slot light. So let's see, it gives a pretty good flash, and it has a pretty good 4,000 lumen video light, which, sorry, Cheryl, these guys at home.
Wear your sunscreen.
One really cool thing on this deal is it had a mode where you could put it on like almost half power, the video light. So you use it like a focusing light and you could shoot video. And at the same time, it had a flash connection. So if you flashed, it would cut the video light off, flash, and then turn the video light back on, all without having to touch it. So ease of operation, this was super. Now, I was making fun of backscatter, and David stole my joke, but they started making one of these now. This guy, meanwhile, went out of business in Hong Kong during the pandemic, and so we've got 4 of them, I guess, 5 actually, 2 of which fully work. So there's all kinds of choices for lights, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. And the battery type and the charging options for me are most important. I want something actually that I can buy a generic battery and not pay so much for it, and then charge up, have extra sets and so on. Burn time is important because, you know, if you get a battery where you can't charge it like the Sola, you better have it be able to last for 2 dives, because a lot of times you go out for 2 boat dives and you don't have a chance to recharge this thing on the boat. So it's just, and I don't want to buy 2 of those, not at $700 a piece. And then on down the line, the specs, you need to look at it. The light I just showed you is kind of a warm temperature. I don't really like it, but you can correct that in post processing. I think things with a bluer cast are a little more popular now. So I would recommend looking for something like 5,500 or maybe 6,000. 6,000 is getting pretty blue, but it's popular now. And you'll see there's some that are multi-purpose. And there's another thing you might want to consider, which is it flash capable? Does it have a burst mode or auto off, at least when you flash? And then there are lots of accessories. So let me show you what the latest iteration, which is this monster. And some of you also have more than one of these. So the way this operates, you got to hold 2 buttons down until it comes on, and it's going to show you that it's what its power level is. And I won't hit you with this one, Cheryl, I promise. But so when you get it turned on, then you go up and down in power by the left button and up by the right button. Okay, and to turn it off, you do that. This one also has a burst mode where you can plug your fiber optic in there, and it will get about 10% more power, and will dim also when it does its little flash and then come back on again.
What light is this?
This is made by Kraken, but others have the same kind of capabilities. I think Big Blue has burst modes too. So I'm not trying to push one brand. One thing about this is the battery is not off the shelf, and they're not cheap to buy, but it's a
They do come out.
pretty cool form factor. Used as a weapon if you got in a tight spot.
Craig, while you're at that subject, can
Yes,
you
ma'am.
mention the problems that you guys had carrying your flashlight batteries and getting them?
Yeah.
Sure. I
That
mean,
also would factor into which one you want to buy.
The international law says that I can put this on the
Yes.
plane,
Yeah.
just like this, because it can't easily be turned on because you have to hold down 2 buttons for 2 seconds at the same time. And the battery is mounted in the object. Now, we got to an internal flight in the Philippines and the guy told me he didn't give a flip what international law said. This was the Philippines and this was his little airline, and I had to take all my batteries out. So depends on who you run into.
And do what with them?
That's your problem, sir.
In your
And
carry-on.
Put them in your carry-on.
Carry-on.
Did he see you put them in the carry-on and let you?
Yeah, no, you can carry them on the plane.
They just want them out of.
You have to carry them on.
housing,
Yeah,
so they won't
You
combust.
can't put them in.
The cargo.
You can't have them in your luggage that's in the bay area.
Check.
Flying,
You also have a
because it can
problem.
cause a fire.
My
You can
problem,
always put 'em
when
in
I
your
was coming
camera.
through Cairo, they didn't understand their own rules and they confiscated $1,200 worth of batteries.
So my solution to that is
Did
fly
your
Singapore
dad
Airlines. They
travel
know what they're
insurance
doing.
cover that?
Now I know the rules and I have them with me.
Yeah.
Did Dan reimburse you for that?
I got, actually, Big Blue gave me 2 and I got 2 of them for 20% off from Barry, so it helped.
Okay, so the other cool thing about these kinds of lights, the new ones, is the remote control that David mentioned. That's really great. You have a fiber optic that goes from one of these ports into one of these ports, and this thing is mounted, and when you get in the water, you just have it on the standby mode that I showed you, and then all of this stuff from these buttons is done by this guy. So it's just sitting here right by your hand. You just, if you want to turn it on, you hit the middle button. You want to go up, you go there, down, you go there, and
It's mounted on there.
it's mounted on the housing.
On
Yeah,
the
this
housing.
Right next to your right hand.
hand.
you mount it wherever you want to.
Left and right hand.
Yeah, and this will actually control 2 lights, so you can have 2 of them up there, or control both of them.
But you have to have a fiber optic that goes to both of them.
It's pretty cool. Betsy doesn't like such big things, so this is hers. And she shoots burst mode too, so she has 2 fiber optic cables on it. One of them comes from a flash trigger. The other one is for this remote control. And it's exactly the same operation. So you can see, you actually don't want the hard edges. You want it to grade away from the center spot so that you get a nice transition. And of course, this
Can
has,
you bring down
yeah, it has different levels.
no, not the level of light, but the size of the?
No, it's not controllable on this.
Okay.
But actually, you have to have a different light.
That's all kind of
For that, you can use what we call a narrow beam light, which is, this one is not expensive at all. It's an Orca torch, and I'll show you, it has a very narrow beam. It's got an 8-degree beam, so you can see that it's quite a bit narrower.
Hand it at the wall, maybe so everybody can see it.
And it's got 2 powers, so the power level is not high, but this is for macro work, so we don't. You'll see some things shot with this. Ready?
Back on?
Yep. Cool. Hope so. Okay, I'm talking about light rays and losing color and all that. So let me get back to that. I'll some bad luck. So what I want you to think of here is there's different points where we can intervene in this process to try to change the light field that we're recording. Not much you can do about the light rays coming from the surface. That's the sun, okay? I'm not gonna change that, but if you add a light to the situation, then you can add, say, red light, but you have to remember that that is now underwater and it's losing red as it travels as well. So you're going to, that's why you need big lights, is you lose it on the way there and you lose it on the way back. And the other thing I want you to take away from this picture is it's a very complicated situation and it's depth and distance dependent. So you're not going to solve the problem completely. So just give up and go have a beer. Okay, well, what about shooting stills with continuous lighting? And David talked about this, so I'll go through it pretty quickly, although I have some points that maybe he didn't talk about. I think the most important point is that you can use all the features of the camera and figure out creative ways to do that. So, for example, you can shoot in program mode and you can do it quite reliably because you've got the continuous lighting there. It's metering it and it's exactly like shooting outside. So it also can simplify it quite a bit. You can use auto exposure, burst shooting, time lapse, whatever you want to do. Maybe it's less gear. I don't know. If you're like me and you have 2 strobes and another light up there and 2 other lights, maybe not. But another thing for people just starting out, it's easier to switch between shooting video and stills if you use continuous lighting. So you can just go from one to the other, and it's quicker to get both of them on the same subject once you get set up. It's just which button do I push there? But it's pretty much going to be limited to macro and close range if you want to light the subject. Of course, natural lighting is a different story, but let's don't kid ourselves. There's no way to get the intensity that you get from a flash. So it's not a substitute. And that means that it can be difficult or almost impossible to achieve some of the flash effects that you might like to achieve. And just to show you a couple of recent photos, courtesy of Betsy. This is some super macro she took in Romblon.
Now, what light was this? How many lumen light was this?
This is her 10,000.
10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of shutter speeds are you shooting there?
Program mode.
You don't know? Whatever program you pick.
Well, you know,
Whatever light
when
says it
you're
was.
when you're doing video, I mean, some people insist on shooting manual for video too, but I mean, like I said, I don't got time for that.
What I do is I shoot it in manual mode and I set my shutter speed and aperture, but I'm using auto ISO.
Yeah, and you can do all those sorts of things. The thing to remember is in video, you don't have that much choice for your shutter speed. You know, it's gonna, you know, if you're shooting 60 frames a second, you know, you're gonna be needing to be around 120th. So, but you know, those programs are pretty smart. They know how long your lens is. They know the characteristics of your camera. They know what high ISO is, and so, you know.
So were these a still that you took, or was that a video?
No, it's just still.
Stills.
You want to say anything?
Continuous light with this. This
10,000 lumen.
Mhm. Okay.
Inverse
one,
mode.
just
Inverse
one,
mode?
just one.
Just one.
Yeah.
Inverse mode? No.
It was just I did not use verse.
So it was just on and you took a
So
still.
I just put this right on the cold shoe in my camera
Mhm.
housing. So I just have one, not 2, just one. And those are the stills I got with. And those guys were.
So in my mind, action cameras and wide angle kind of go together in lighting. So we're just going to talk about them together, and you can stop me anytime. The challenges that you have with lighting for wide angle, which action cameras generally are, is you can't light up everything, okay? Much as some of us have tried. And the problem is that you have different sources of light with different whitenesses in the same frame. So no processing is going to handle both of those correctly. Now you can do some things in processing with, you know, selecting objects and things like that. But to me, that's like just about lost the war here. If you're trying to fix it in processing, it's better to get it in the field. So you need to try to shoot so that you don't create problems for yourself. And I'm saying avoid hotspots. So we had some great examples of hotspot problems, and unfortunately, we've deleted most of them because they look like crap, you know. But anyway, I found this one. This was, you know, a potentially nice film if you did some work on it. But you can see the hotspot there, right? The light is kind of, and this was at night, I think. But you know, it doesn't have to be at night. We had some where you're flying over beautiful reef scenes, and the light puts a big red honking ball in the middle of it. So you want to avoid the hot spots, and the way you do that is to please move this one. Oh, there we go. Okay, you want floodlights with a fairly wide beam, 100 plus if you can get it. These are 120, and get close. This is what David was saying. Blend, so that the lighting that you do have blends naturally with the ambient light. That's what you want to try to achieve. And so here's some examples where I think much better example of achieving that. You brought the colors out, and this will just loop for a second. And you know, you don't really see any obvious, you know, disturbing things other than
So
some.
is this still just a single
Yep.
light? Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's that single 10,000. Okay. And lately there's some other opportunities. I just got this yesterday, so I couldn't resist. Let me get it free. And, you know, I'll show you the ad for the thing. And like, so how could you resist this? I love this Chinese advertising. Submersible waterproofing technology innovation. You can take all the photos and videos you want on the ocean floor, bringing you the perfect visual effect. And they got a babe there at the same time.
Well, she has light arms and no lights on.
Exactly.
Of course, you put the light underneath so you get the Frankenstein.
Yeah, Frankenstein approach.
So this little sucker goes on a GoPro mount, and you know, yeah, it's got some light, and okay, 164 foot depth rating. Internal battery, you just charge it with a C, a USB-C. That's not even the brightest one. There you go, that's the bright. And
Get it on the wall.
who wants to make a guess at the price?
$50.
36.
Wow.
36 bucks.
Really?
36.
How many lumens is this on?
It's, well, they don't quote it in lumens. They
Yeah.
watch out for this. They quote lux instead, which is
That's cheap.
lumens. Well, it's not cheating. It's just a different measure. I mean,
It looks about
lux
200.
is good for judging what the camera can do, because lux is a flux that comes through the lens, and so it says if you got 10 lux, my camera can still have an image or something. So that makes sense. But this is on the output side, so lumens is what you want on the output side. But some guy said it's about 1,500 lumens or something like that. But you know, for 3 or 4 feet, you're going to get some reds, and so you know, if you're shooting GoPro, it's got a picture. You snap your GoPro on top of this, or vice versa. And you
So
got,
what's the brand and where do we find it?
oh, it's on Amazon. If you want to really know, it's called Suptig. Some guys in China.
Yeah, I've seen them around for a while.
Yeah.
They've been there several years.
What's the proposed battery? Chinese guys.
2.5 hours.
Guys shooting.
We're going to talk about Chinese. You know, China's not what it used to be. I'm pretty impressed with some of the technology right now. I saw one of these Marilux housing setups. Ooh.
Were they Chinese?
Yeah, Marilux
I
is
didn't know where they
Chinese.
were.
Yeah, there's a guy from India at 3P that had one of them, and he had sold his Nauticam to get this Marilux.
Wow.
It looked good. Okay, macro lighting. Gosh, you got all these possibilities. Let me show you another one that's really keen on, which is this ring light.
Oh, yeah.
Now, ring lights have been around forever. They're used in portrait photography. And why? Because it gets rid of the shadows. And so it's just what it says. It's a ring light.
Who makes this one?
This is Kraken. And again, this one is up to 3,000 lumens.
Yeah,
I
that's pretty bright.
apologize. And the cool thing is, it just screws onto your 67 millimeter port, and there's none of this moving the flash around, or you want to talk about it?
Awesome.
Right on the front.
Yeah, right on the front. It has
There's
one.
no arms, there's no heaviness.
This is couch potato video.
It goes right around your port. It's flat. It just makes everything so easy. There's no
Okay, how much is
shadows.
this one?
Easy
It also
to
has a
turn
burst
on.
mode. These aren't expensive. They were like,
It was like $250.
yeah, $300 maybe.
I cracked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we find mix one, Kraken mix one, but they're the exact same thing.
Yeah, and there've been several versions of them. If you get one, you want the newer one.
Use
It's
the
$3,000.
flip filters. The flip.
No, this is the problem. It does, once you put this on, you can't put a flip filter or a diopter. I say yet, DIY, that's a husband problem to figure out how to screw this on and then put the diopter on there and make it stay, you know, so I'm thinking either Velcro or duct tape or, but you gotta be able to take it off, you know?
Sooner or
Only
later.
ones that front thread, some underneath.
Yeah, the diopter's more
So
important.
I think I'm gonna Velcro something.
If you wanna go from
Well,
just getting the shot or getting the true macro shot.
okay, so the thing is though, it's okay unless you want to do super macro, okay? Because she had the Olympus 60 millimeter lens in there, which is a 1-to-1 macro lens. So you can get pretty darn good macro with that. But we were in Romblon where, you know, stuff is the size of a grain of rice. And so she wanted to.
Yeah, the ring light's good for stuff that's this size, okay?
Mhm.
But for stuff that's this size, that you don't know what it is until you blow it up,
Right.
you gotta have a flip filter.
I needed the picture like that.
Just crop the hell out of it.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So what I wanted to make is the narrow beam lights, the spotlights I'm calling them, narrow beam, they're not snoots, okay? They have their own optics, and you need to be careful about that because it's not just a snoot. It does the same kind of effect as a snoot, but, and the other thing I was gonna mention, this is my latest experiment gone wrong. If anybody needs a good dive light, we can talk. This one just came out and I thought, well, this is really cool because it has what you asked about. I can change the size of it. So let me show you this thing.
Is that the same as this?
Put it on the wall.
No, it's not. So if you look over here on
This wall, honey, so we can all see it.
Oh, you got the adjustable one?
Yeah, go over here.
I had to make that decision.
This thing will go into the next county. I mean, it is really, you can see it. It's really, so the thing that's wrong with it is it's too sharp. You know, so when you,
Fuzzy edge.
yeah, it's too much of a hard edge in the water, especially in the water, it's just like focus, you know, so,
You have the snoot that Henry has?
Well, his
I did,
head is
yeah.
bigger
Yes.
than mine.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's the same manufacturer though, isn't it?
Yeah.
yeah, but that has optics in it too,
Yeah,
yeah.
that one's actually got an optic lens in it.
Yeah.
So this one isn't as powerful, but it's a little bit.
Well, it's made for macro.
Made very close macro. I have one of those, you have to be careful because it doesn't work correctly on this light, even though it screws in. This is a narrow beam light.
Yeah.
A narrow beam light, his is a floodlight, and when you put that snoot onto this, it makes weird rings, so, you know. I thought, well, maybe I can shoot with that, but, you know, okay,
How many lumens is this one?
it's probably
This
about,
one is maximum of 3,000, but it's got 4 different settings, so you can go down you go from 400 to 3,000.
the 3,000 you can only shoot for about a minute though.
Yeah, you won't get much burn time with 3,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you know, it'll
But
only do it for a short period of time.
let's be careful though, look, this is like 1,300, okay? The stuff I'm gonna show you is all shot with this. Okay,
The one you just showed us?
this one is 1,300,
The Kraken? Okay.
yeah. This one's 1,300 and I shot most of the stuff you're gonna see using this.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other stuff I'm using now are We were talking about the Chinese lights. These are made by a company called Pro. I came across them because Blue Water carries them.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try some real narrow beam lights. So this one, you can see, it's not very bright at all, but again, it's made for subjects that are like right here. Okay. And if you want to go super macro, they make this one, just like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really small.
It's a real.
And that's too high power for some things too.
Put your hand close to it, like 6 inches in front. Okay, this one's 6.
Yeah. And this one has some fancier stuff. You can actually take this little tip off of it and it makes it a little bit wider angle. Or you can even take the whole thing off. And of course, I was in the down shooting and I needed a little bit bigger aperture. And so I thought, I said, you know, if I take that thing off,
There it
I'm gonna
goes.
lose it. I'm gonna lose it. No, I'm not. I'm gonna put it right here in my hand where I can't possibly forget it. And I got through shooting the subject, I looked down, where the hell is it?
Oh, man.
So this is how I got to know the factory that makes these things. I called them up and
How much is that?
these aren't expensive. They're like $150 maybe at the most. This one's a little, maybe $200. But these guys are onto something here because they're making really nice, compact, multi-purpose lights. So this one costs less than $200. Has great operation. I like it. It's 2 buttons to come on. And what it does is it has a fairly good, maybe 2000. And then if you use the second button, it shifts you over to a spotlight button.
Oh.
And then the other button goes up and down to the power. See, so you got a really simple operation here, a small form factor, battery you can change. It's a macro tool, and it's not expensive. And I think the quality, if you look at the build on these things.
Is that Kraken as well?
Well, you know, no, this is called Pro. But I think all these companies, I don't want to belittle anybody, but I'm sure they have them all made in the same factories over in China. Because this is really pretty good quality. I invite you to come out here and look at it. If you want to get a little fancier, get a little bit higher power on this. This is 2700, but it has the same thing basically. One click, it puts you over to the spotlight that has different levels on the spotlight. And it also, though, has a red feature that you can do.
Yeah, that's really good for things like the mandarin fish and turtles nesting on the beach,
Right.
things like that.
Okay, that's all. That's a lot. That's, believe it or not, that's not all the gear we have. I could have brought a lot of it.
So let me ask a question, because you've been doing this a long time and you're so experienced, you know what can work and what can't. And so of all those things that you just showed us on this table, what would you say is it gives you the versatility of diving a shot of the reef and then using it as you get to the macro images?
What I do is I take this. If I know I'm going to be doing, you know, just either wide angle or macro. And when I was in 3P, I never got this thing out. You know, it was all the little things here. So I take this with the remote control, and I'll take one other of these, like maybe this narrow beam, and I'll put it on an arm that I can move around easily. That was before I had these guys, though. These are pretty cool because you can mount them on a little arm on your cold shoe and just leave it there. You know, it's just like, okay, this is where it is. It's only going to go up and down like this, and that can really help when you're trying to go after small subjects. So I like the one big one, one small one. You know.
And Betsy?
Same thing. Same thing.
But you're using the 10,000 instead of the 18,000?
I don't use that really big one. That's just too heavy for me. Yeah,
You use the 10,000.
I use the 10,000.
And by the way, I forgot to say,
You know, I do the 10,000 and then, you know, then one of these.
And you're loving the ring light.
Yeah, or I just take the ring light and put it on, and then you can also take one of these and one of those, you know, because the ring light is around the fort.
So I forgot to mention,
You know.
this one also, the 10,000 has a spot feature as well. There's a
But no
lot-
red light filter.
This one does not have a red light. That's really cool. It's a wider spot though. So this is about a 15-degree spot. This one is about an 8-degree spot. See the difference. And just for comparison, I think this one is a 5-degree. 3. So.
And how did they help you solve the I'm gonna lose the piece problem?
I paid them some money and they sent me an extra one.
You buy 3 extras?
The most important question, what was Dustin using?
Dustin, well, I mean, he wasn't in his normal mode there because he had some wide angle lights that he didn't even use. Do you remember what he?
He had some kind of video light that he wanted something similar
But he
to
was doing
this.
super macro, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was doing mainly macro, not
Not
real
super.
super.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very, very limited.
He had 2 diopters. He had 2 diopters on his camera. One of
He
them
had
was.
2 strengths of diopters. He had one that flipped this way and one that flipped that way.
He had
Like what I have now.
He had the SMC because he's shooting the full frame, so he had the SMC, and there are 2 power levels there. So he had a smaller one and a larger one.
But lighting, because most of his stuff is lighting, is very directed light.
Okay, well, he had one of these lights, like one of these Kraken lights, and then he had a snoot as
Yeah,
well.
okay,
good.
Okay, well, let's move on here. Natural lighting. We're not going to get through this stuff if I don't. Why natural lighting? Well, it's getting very popular. If you watch BBC documentaries, they don't have big honking lights like these. They do other stuff. But the question is, again, what do you want to see? Do you want to see what you see with your eyes underwater? I don't think anybody wants that because it's pretty gray. But do you want to see a near field that's really lit up with very bright colors? Or do you want something that's in between the two, which is what I'm calling natural lighting? But there's no rules. It's up to you and you decide what do you want to see. I want to make one point here. We'll get to it in the end. The animals don't like the lights. Okay, so David's already mentioned that. I have evidence. So yes, they do actually. I have film of that.
They don't see, but they sense light.
When you get light on them, some of them, as soon as you put the light on them, they turn. Have you ever noticed
The nocturnal species too go under.
Have you ever seen it? I mean, I've chased them around in a circle a couple of times and go, what the hell am I doing? You know, this bug is outsmarting me here. Some people would say that's not too surprising. Okay, but this just shows you how bad it really is. This is a graph of the absorption curves, and I won't go through it, but it basically says that the water's polluted and so on, more light gets absorbed in a different way. But in clear oceanic water, that's the arrow I have here. If you get 40% absorption per meter, then when the lights travel through 3 meters or about 10 feet of water, you've got 6% of the light left, of the reds, sorry, 6% of the red light left. Over here in the blues and the greens, you have almost all of it left. So that's our problem. That's the magnitude of it. And then there's all this other stuff going on. The ripples, depends on, you know, the frequency of the waves, what it does. And then there's this thing they call the Rayleigh scattering that gives you either kind of a blue or grayish cast in the water that, you know, it just permeates. So even when you're in gin clear water, you've got stuff going on. So what are the solutions? Well, solvent and post-processing, well, that's, you know, going to be affected by the signal to noise ratio and how much you can do with your data. Camera settings, though, can help you a lot. If you have an underwater white balance setting on your camera, set it and use it, because, you know, if you go onto the internet and here's some tutorials, they'll tell you, oh, you need to do a custom white balance. And then they get into this business about, and you need to do it every meter that changes, you know, and all of this kind of, you know, right. And the whale shark's gone at that point. And I'm going to say that even if you do that, it's still distance dependent. Okay. So you can white balance it for 1 meter away and 2 meters away, it's wrong. So let's get real. You're going to have to do some stuff in post-processing anyway. They're all fairly limited. And of course, the ultimate thing is to do what BBC does. You get yourself, you know, a nice camera that shoots raw and 14-bit raw, and you record that, and you got about $100,000 in the water, and you still have the problem that it's variable, even if you do that.
One other problem with custom white balance is that if you start moving your camera around and you're pointing into the light, and then you start moving and you point away from it, you get a completely different, all of a sudden things are changing in the background, and blue doesn't look blue like it did when it did the first.
Exactly. And don't have it on the little slide here, but I would never use automatic white balancing. I mean, it just can get so screwed up with all of this stuff. I just set mine on daylight, you know, and because that's where I want my lighting to be. So I set my white balance, see, to expect that. And of course I don't get it right, but that's what post-processing is about. So, okay, a good compromise in all of this is a red filter. And the red filters get kind of a bad name sometime, but I'm gonna give a little pitch for it. The red filter does something that none of these other things do. White balance happens after you have digitized the data. And now for stills, shooting raw, Dave was absolutely right. You can change the white balance in processing. It's a processing parameter, but it doesn't solve your problem of not having the reds. So the one thing you can do is put a red filter on, which is analog, which this is crazy now, I know, but it removes the blues and greens. So you actually cut down on the light that you have coming into your camera, but you do it in a way that balances the spectrum. So it means that your camera settings are going to be less desirable. And if you don't like high ISOs, then red filters are going to make you even more uncomfortable because it's going to raise the ISO in general. But you get the right exposure, you get a more balanced spectrum that comes into the camera, and it's able to sample it better, and you have better chance in post-processing. Now, I say this particularly for video because you have better possibilities of removing noise in video than you do with stills, because you have a third dimension to filter. You have not just the two dimensionals of the plane of the photograph itself, you have time running. So you have time filters that look for noise from frame to frame to frame and can remove it. So it's a much more powerful noise reducing filter than you have with stills, and you can take advantage of that.
Now, have you done much with the blue filters and the light, the red filter?
Yeah, I'm going to show that. Well, this is a good time to more toys. Okay. So there's all kinds of red filters that you can get. Enon made one that I just couldn't resist that is actually a variable red filter. It's a polarizer, and so you have this on your camera, and I just eyeball it. You know, you put it on there and you rotate it until you say, oh, okay, that looks about like the right color, right spectrum. Because again, you're going to fix it in processing. But and I didn't believe this for a long time. I'm glad you brought it up. But you know, the ads were correct. This does actually work. So what you do is you put the red filter on the camera, and now you have something that's not really well illuminated because you've just got natural light. So what are you going to do? Well, if you get one of these guys and light it up, now you've got a big honking red spot in the middle of your light field, and you don't want that. So instead, guess what? You take that expensive light and you put this filter on there so that it takes the red out of it. But that's so that the light will look like the ambient light, right? Because remember, it's going back through here again. So you take the red out, and then you take the blue and green out when it goes through here, and you end up with a balanced spectrum. I'll show you.
The first time I did that was in 1997.
I believe it.
And it didn't work very well.
Well, let's just see how some things work. And this is what I just talked about here. There's all kinds of red filters you can get. I bought a cheap one like this on the right, and it worked fine, except the glass fell out somewhere on the dive. So I recommend the Enon if you want to get into this. They make other ones too for other problems like green water and so on.
What are you calling EMA?
INON.
Enon, it's they make accessories, yeah. Okay, so here's some natural lighting. We're going to compare an action camera with what you can get with, so this is Betsy's DJI Action 2. And just process to bring out, oh, that doesn't look very good on the screen.
Lights, no filter, what are you doing here?
It's total natural light, nothing.
Natural.
Yeah, total natural light.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem is the light.
And because her camera doesn't have an underwater white balance. I don't think GoPros do either. Maybe they do now. But the EM1 Mark II does. So I filmed similar areas, same day actually. And this is, it looks really dark on there. I apologize. But one thing you can notice though, as you get closer and closer, you can see that the exposure of these colors is changing because of the distance factor that I was talking about. So far away, I didn't see so much color, and now when I get closer here, I do.
So this is with the red inside the housing on your
No,
camera?
this is with the underwater white balance. No red filters. No red filters at all.
No lights, no filter.
No lights, no filters.
No lights.
Okay, so we talked about this lighting for effect. I always think about, Pavarotti singing Nessun Dorma or something. How do they light him up, And so look for what you want to achieve and see what you can do with these lights. I will say, if the subject's moving, it gets a lot harder because you want, if you're spotting him up, you want everything to move with the subject or you notice it. It's like when Gene Kelly's dancing and they're following him around with a spotlight, they better keep it on him, Okay, so, but the success that you get goes way down, okay? Can tell you that. So let me just show you though some, oh, I'm not gonna show you anything like that. Oh. This is not what I wanted to do. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that means lock the door.
So these are some successes I'll show you. Just a little film here of some stuff I've done recently using these.
What is the name of that critter?
That's
a garbage disposal.
That's a Malibe. Malibe. It's a nudibranch. Swimming anemone.
Cute.
My wig.
I thought it was a nudibranch until I got the film back.
Oh, it is a nudibranch.
No, it's an anemone.
The first one.
Oh yeah, the first one was.
Yeah, the first one's a
Is it
nudibranch.
Olympus? Or is this Olympus?
I think this is the Olympus.
Yeah, this is the Olympus. I don't have any of the
And
new.
what kind of lighting they're choosing there?
These are all with that, the light I showed you. Yeah. This is X-rated. I apologize. This is some super macro. So these are taken generally with, as opposed to what David was saying, these are taken pretty much with the light coming from above. And I'll say a little bit more about that if we have just a minute. And here's one where the guy was moving quite a bit and trying to follow him.
And are you also looking through the viewfinder as opposed to the?
I do both. I look through the viewfinder and sometimes I peek around the side and, it's a two-handed operation. Sometimes I have to move the light a little bit, with one hand. So, okay, so that shows you that you can be successful if you try, but I thought it was unfair to just show that. So I'm going to show you the sausage making now, what it looks like when you're trying to set up and do one of these. So here's a crocodile fish. This was on our Solomon Islands trip. And so what I'm trying to do here is get the subject in the center of the frame and get the part I want to illuminate also in the center of the frame, because you want the lighting, the spot in the center of the frame, or at least where you're metering, so that it meters the spot. Otherwise you get this stuff like this. It's blown out on his nose now. So now I'm gonna just kind of slowly try to get it up there in the middle, where now it gets metered better. Yeah. So once you do that, you can go and take some video and process it, and that is not showing very well. This is not really a success because he's got kind of a blue spot that on the top of his nose, and it kind of blows it out. So I wouldn't use this as a keeper, but I wanted to show you how long it takes you to try to get something here. Okay, I wanted to say one other thing now about light positioning. So this one, I thought this was a really interesting subject. He's munching down on something here, and he's a pretty interesting nudibranch to start with. And I'm filming him with this big floodlight that I have, and it just, you know, I'm seeing all this crap in the water. So I got the little narrow beam light and put it above him and pointing pretty much down, not straight down, but, you know, probably 75 degrees or something. And you can get this.
That's pretty big for a nudie, isn't he?
He's
Looks
about
like,
like,
yeah, 3 inches.
finally, I want to talk about the environmental considerations. They don't like lights. Try to not blow them out, and don't create light pollution, and turn your damn lights off after you're finished filming. So let's spend a minute to look at this now, because I thought this was a test that I shot actually. On the left, we have what I'm calling natural plus lighting. So this is with a red filter and the blue filter and the light on it. So you can see that on the left now, there's no displeasing shadows or anything like that, but the fish are glowing a little bit. And on the right, I've got the big floodlight on. But so the coloring is quite different. I kind of like the natural one myself now, but especially when I look off in the distance, how it's more continuous as you look further out. Over here, the other one falls off very
Well,
quickly.
and that's what you see when you're
Yeah.
when you're 10 feet away from that coral mountain.
So, but what I want you to notice here is it starts over again. Both of them are shot in about the same spot at about the same time. And you can see there's tons of fish when I start off. Okay, now it's restarted. There's lots of fish around there right now, right? And they're swimming around with the lights on, and they just kind of go away, you know? So something to think about. One other comparison here. This is with using a red filter, and this is a very shy creature, a starry grouper. And he's kind of wondering about me, but he says, okay, you don't look like a problem. And he's not sure about it or anything. And this is just using the red filter now. So then, now I'm going to turn on the ambient light with the filter on. And I don't know if you can see, but now his eye, no, you can't see it on there. If you were looking here, you'd see the eye is more delineated. It's a little more contrast in the picture. But then watch what happens when I turn the floodlight on. Yep. Okay. And it's not just those fish either, and it's not just lights. They don't like us. Okay, so here's one shot, no red filter. No, sorry, this is with a variable red filter, but just with it turned down very, very low. And this is a pygmy seahorse in natural light.
OM?
Yes. No, this is the EM.
EM 1.2.
He just doesn't like me. So there you go, folks.
They're just shy.
They are. And that's it. Questions or comments while we pack up?
So the blue lights, the red filter, have you done that in big scenes or anything? The blue lights and red filter?
No, that's